Good Erev Shabbos, everybody. Welcome to Jerry's Parsha Ponderings for Parshiot Acharei-Kedoshim, coming to you live from Cranford, New Jersey in my travels. And we start this week's Parsha with the Avoda of Yom Kippur. Parsha Acharei-Mot is, for the most part, the Avoda of Yom Kippur. And one of the things that I was thinking about were the goats, the Seir Lashem and the Seir Azazel, and how the Gemara in Yuma goes into great detail about how they have to be similar. They have to practically be indistinguishable one from the other, and it's interesting and confusing at the same time. The whole idea of the scapegoat, the Seir Azazel, how it's thrown off a cliff, it's cringy almost to us nowadays, like thinking about that type of animal abuse. I'm sure PETA would have a lot to say about that. But, and listen, we really don't know how much of this stuff is going to be reinstituted upon, Mashiach and the whole idea of reinstituting the temple sacrifices. Will there actually be animal sacrifices? There was back then. It's not really part of worship nowadays in any segment. Could be that Bayit Shlishi will just be a shul, very possibly. We don't know. And maybe everything will go back. We don't know. But that doesn't, we still need to learn these things because there are tremendous lessons built into it. It's not only about the physical act of the sacrifice. But why is it that Seir Lashem and the Seir Azazel have to be indistinguishable? And there's a very deep lesson and an important lesson. Very often we do things in God's name that are really being done la'azazel. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. This I heard from one of my Rabbanim, Rav Moshe Meah Weiss. I may have mentioned this in the past, but just as an example. You're in shul, and the Baal Kriya is reading, and you're waiting on that fast. You're gonna hit it out of the park as soon as he makes a mistake. He says lach instead of lacha, and you're on it. Lach! In Rabbi Weiss's shul, only the Gabbai and the Rav can correct the Baal Kriya, and it's done in a way where you wouldn't even know he's being correct. You think you're being frum. You're going to make sure to make sure it's done correctly. You last night were enjoying a scotch, maybe a couple of bottles of wine, sitting at the table, and this other fellow is busy preparing the kriya. So in the Rav's shul, in Rabbi Weiss's shul, if you correct the Baal Kriya and you're not the Rav or the Gabbai, you have the honor and privilege of laning next week. Now, you think you're doing this righteously, but what you've actually done, think about it. Kriyas HaTorah is a Darabanan. Malbin Pnei Chavero Barabim is a Dairaisa Yaharig Vial Yavar. But you're doing it righteously. You mean well. Let me give you another example. Calling people out on social media. And when I say people, I'm not talking about politicians and people that live in the public sphere. I'm talking about your buddies, your friends, other people that you may not know personally, but are other human beings. And you're calling them names and you're cursing them out and how do you do this? You're embarrassing people publicly? You're calling them an idiot? Again, I'm not talking about politicians that live in the public sphere. Even that we have to be careful about. And I'm speaking to myself as well. I'm talking to myself primarily. But how many times do we do things in God's name? Nowadays, everything that's done is in the public. There are people in communities, from communities, that don't have smartphones for whatever reason. Okay? They may not even realize the scrutiny that they're under. We're doing things in God's name. We want to help out this institution and help out these people. And yet there's different types of frauds being committed, and that eventually gets uncovered. And guess what? You meant well, but you created a Chilul Hashem Dairaisa. Did you do that in God's name? Or was it in Azazel's name? Interesting. One of the views of the devil that is popular in literature and in the media is the goat head. You know, the goat head, that guy? The scapegoat. This is where it comes from. And they have to be exactly where you could make a mistake unless the Kohen pulls out one and says Lashem and one is La Azazel. We have to be so careful, especially when we wear our religion on our sleeve. Is it Lashem or is it La Azazel? Is it the Yetzer Tov? Is it the Yetzer Hara? And we really need to think about it before we act. That is, I believe, one of the most important lessons of the Avodah of Yom Kippur. When we say Ashamnu, Baganu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu Dofi, was it Lashem or was it La Azazel? And we have to take that in every aspect, in every walk of life that we do. We have to be so careful because there is nothing private anymore. You know, there's an eye in the sky. And why are we living in this reality now? Maybe because for generations we thought, well, no one can see me, so I can get away with it. Well, Hashem was always watching. But, you know, if we don't see the eye in the sky, so, you know, ayin roa, but we don't see it, so not really real. Well, today it really is real. There is an eye in the sky. Besides HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everything we do is under scrutiny. It's all going to be on Facebook or Twitter or wherever. Parler, Gab, it's all out there. There's nothing that can be hidden. It will show up. So think before you act. Besides Acharei-Mos, this week we read Kedoshim. And probably one of the greatest Divrei Torah I ever heard, was from Rav Aaron Gruman Shlita, the Rav of Congregation Torah Emes in Rivers, New Jersey. Arguably one of the greatest Shabbos drushes I ever heard. Kedoshim Tihiyu. Second Parsha this week starts off, Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yamarta aleihem Kedoshim Tihiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. You are holy, and there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing you can do about it. It's a fact. Kedoshim Tihiyu, you will be holy. Why? Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. We are God's representatives on earth. And everything that we do is reflected back upon him. Now, if we learn the levels of tumah There's a Rishon, a Sheni, a Shlishi. Only Truma can be a Shlishi. A Rishon obviously is a mace, right? Only one thing can become a Revi'i Latuma, and that's Kudshim. What's Kudshim? Something, a sacrifice, something holy that was offered up on the Mizbeach could become a Revi'i Latuma. It is the most sensitive to Tumah, the uncleanliness. We are Kedoshim. Am Yisrael is holy, which means that we are very susceptible to Tumah. And if we look at the history of Am Yisrael over the millennia, Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, have been at the forefront of everything, good and not so good. Give you an example. Look at Israel today. 73 years young, 4,000 years old. At the forefront of every technological revolution, of energy, of startups, of business, of this, military, you name it. And it happens even though we sometimes don't even realize how the state keeps going on. Where I've had 4 elections in 2 years, it's the whole it's completely dysfunctional. Yet, at the forefront of it. Am Yisrael has been at the forefront of every ism, every movement. Psychology, Freud, science, Einstein. It's like a schlock rock song. Karl Marx was Jewish. Engels was Jewish. Lenin was Jewish. It could go one way, or it could go the other way. Think about it. Kedoshim Tihiyu. You are holy. Bernie Madoff. If you don't use your kochot, George Soros. If you don't use your kochot for Kedusha, they're going to be used for something else. And that may not always be so complimentary. So we, again, think about the goat. Is it Lashem or is it La'azazel? This week, or last week, the head of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which used to be there to prevent anti-Semitism, got upset because Tucker Carlson said something about people coming in over the border in order to vote and change the makeup of the American political scene. Well, of course they want people to come in over the border. Who do you think they're going to be voting for? Donald Trump? And he got upset. You have to get rid of Tucker. Tucker's been a friend of Israel since he's been on TV. I mean, these are the people that are defending us. Was it Lashem or was it La'azazel? We're holy. There's nothing we can do about it. And that holiness has to be used properly, or it will be used otherwise. The Parshat Kedoshim goes through a litany of do's and don'ts. Lo tekalel cheresh v'lefnei iver lo titein michshol. Don't curse a deaf person and don't place a stumbling block before the blind. Would anybody today, well, I really shouldn't even ask that question, but I ask it hypothetically, actually place a stumbling block in front of a blind person? Would you yell at a deaf person? Well, I yell at my deaf dog. Would we? Really? What's the Torah telling us? The Torah says you should have honest weights and measures. Don't have even va'oven. What does it mean, even va'oven? Meaning don't have two different weights. Don't have one price for the person with the American accent and another price for the person with the Israeli accent. And you know who you are if you're watching, right? Don't be dishonest. Don't say 15 minutes if you mean an hour. Don't say I'll get to it right away when you're going to get to it in 2 days. That's being dishonest. That's not having proper ethics. That's where Chilul Hashem comes in. That's what taking the Kedusha and using it in a way to defame God's name rather than cause it to be blessed. Right? Because again, God's telling us, you are holy. You're Am Yisrael. It doesn't matter. You may have no interest in being part of the Jewish people. There's nothing you can do about it. And if we didn't believe that, a mere, how many years ago was it? 80 years ago? Less? We were reminded that it didn't matter if we had a Bekesh and a Strammel or if we never put a yarmulke on our head. Low plug. It didn't matter because you're holy. And those of you that don't necessarily want to live that way, you will be reminded of how holy you are. And it may not always be a pleasant reminder. Parshat Kedoshim goes through all these do's and don'ts, all these rules to teach us how to live. Because if we don't live properly, we can't be a proper receptacle for the Torah. In order to be a proper Torah Jew, Torah person, you first have to be a decent person. You can't be a Kli Machzik Bracha or a Kli Machzik Kedusha if you don't live like a mensch. And most of Parshat Kedoshim is about menschlichkeit. How to be just a decent person. And I remember when I was in yeshiva, and I mentioned this before, the first thing we learn is Elu Metziot, when we start learning Gemara in 4th grade. Like, not brachos, Shabbos, Elu Metzios. Because if you don't know, if you find something that isn't yours that you have to return it, then the rest of it doesn't mean anything. You first have to know that this isn't mine, I have to return it. I can't take what doesn't belong to me. That's what the Torah is teaching us. And this is why Parshat Kedoshim is so important. Because we are holy whether we like it or not. We may not even believe in the whole Am Segula, chosen people. It doesn't matter if we believe in it. It's true anyway. And we're going to be reminded. Either the good way or the difficult way. And that's really up to us. Shabbos hi Makar HaBracha. But there's something on this Shabbos that we have to take a special look at. Parshat Kedoshim. Kedoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. What's the next pasuk? The next pasuk is Ish imo v'aviv tiro v'yez shabsosai tishmaru ani Hashem. Wow, manyan shmita itzel ar Sinai. What does this have to do? What does one have to do with the other? You're holy, okay. Be nice to mommy and daddy, and don't be machal Shabbos. I mean, if you look at the Acharei-Kedoshim, the top 10. There are bein adam lachavero, there are bein adam lamakom. Some mitzvot we would know, even if the Torah didn't tell. To be respectful to your parents, I think every two-legged beast, maybe even the four-legged ones, are going to come up with that one. Your parents brought you into the world, they housed you, they clothed you, they fed you. Of course you're going to have derech eretz, I would hope. I would hope. I could tell you this much. If you're in the shidduch business and you see somebody that isn't nice to their parents, you're not going to read that shidduch. Pretty, almost universal. Doesn't matter, Jew, not Jew, what religion, no religion, it doesn't matter. Parents, But it doesn't just say that. It says, Ish imo v'aviv tiro, v'es shabsosai tishmaru. Oh, see, Shabbos I don't know if I'd come up with on my. The Torah tells us why we have to keep Shabbos. Kisheishes yamim asa shemes hashemayim v'yas haaretz. God created the world in 6 periods and rested on the 7th. I don't like using days, even though, because we know that time, 6 days rested on the 7th. But what the Torah is telling us is, just like you would know, Kibbut Avim, you don't need to be told. Shabbos is no less important. Yes, you have to be a mensch first, which is why it says Ish imo vaviv tiro, and then it says Shabsos Aitu. Because first you have to dafen zanen a mensch, which is what the whole Parsha is telling us. But don't think that keeping Shabbos is less important than Kibbut Avim. And notice that Shabbos and Kibbut Avim are both on the left side of the essay. Or rather, I don't know, in this case it would be the right side, right? On the right side, right? On the Bein Adam La Makom side. Because you can't be a Yarei Shamayim if you don't know what it is to be a decent child. You want to fear the Avinu Shabashamayim, you first need to have Derech Eretz for your parents. But Shabbos is no less important. It all goes together. And later in the Parsha it says, "Es Shabtotai Tishmaru Umikdashiti." And notice that Shabbos there comes first. We all talk about rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash and restoring the Malchut. Yes. We're all for it 100%. That's why we're in Israel. That's why it is to bring back the Commonwealth. But as important as Binyan HaMikdash is, first Shabbos. There's no Mikdash if there's no Shabbos. There's no Yiddishkeit if there's. And I've mentioned in this forum many times in my own family, my parents' family, my wife's family. If you didn't keep Shabbos, it's all gone. It's all gone. You're one generation away. Ish imo v'aviv tira'u v'et shabtotai tishmaru. Et shabtotai tishmaru u'mikdashi tira'u. Don't roll on Shabbos. Shabbos imakar bracha. Ein Yisrael nig'olin ela b'schus ha-Shabbos. Have an absolutely wonderful Shabbos. So much to talk about in this week's Parsha. I didn't even touch the tip of the iceberg. But please, look into Kedoshim. There's so much to talk about. Acharei Mos, the Avoda. Have a great Shabbos. Speak words of Torah at the table. Enjoy. Thank you for joining us. See you back here soon. Shabbat Shalom.